No trivia tonight, but make sure to join me next Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern, where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes and give away over $300 to our winner in what is sure to be our biggest prize yet. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. Exactly 1 month ago, we had what might have been the greatest doubleheader by any network in NFL history. At the very least, it was the greatest doubleheader in the history of the NFL on Fox. If you want to learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. But between the Buffalo Bills and Minnesota Vikings battling it out in the national 1 o'clock game, in what was the best game of the year, with the Vikings winning it 33-30 in overtime, and the Dallas Cowboys and Green Bay Packers squaring off in the national 425 game, with the Packers pulling off the comeback victory and winning it 31-28, Fox hit a home run. Their national 1 o'clock game and their national 425 game were nothing short of superb. You couldn't ask for a better two-game slate seen by the majority of the country. It was the highest of highs and probably one of the greatest moments covering the NFL in the near 30-year history of the NFL on Fox. Fast forward to 1 month later, and...
Well. How the turntables...
Yeah, the exact opposite. Anytime a network has a doubleheader, meaning that they get to air two games, it's exciting for that network, because they'll win in the ratings battle, and they'll have the majority of eyeballs on them. And I think Fox was hoping for a great doubleheader with the two games that they had as their national ones. At 1 o'clock, the game broadcast to the majority of the country was the big NFC East battle between the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles. In one corner, you had a Philadelphia team that was the best in football, sitting atop the conference with an 11-1 record and a playoff spot already locked up. And in the other corner, you had a New York Giants team that was 7-4-1 and was fighting for their playoff lives after going winless in their last 3 games and having won just 1 game in the last 6 weeks. This was Fox's marquee game, and had their number 2 crew on it with Joe Davis on play-by-play and Daryl Johnston on color commentary. Unless you were near Texas or were in the Midwest, you were getting this game. As for how that game turned out, it was really bad. Like really bad. Because the Eagles jumped out to a 21-0 lead midway through the second quarter, and they never looked back, as they won it by a final score of 48-22. Although the game wasn't even that close, as the Eagles led it 48-14 before a garbage time touchdown to cut the deficit to a 26-point game with 30 seconds left, and all the backups playing was scored by the Giants. The Eagles scored points on 6 of their first 7 drives, and in total, excluding 2 drives at the end of the half where they just went into the locker room, in Philly's 10 real drives, they scored on 8 of them. New York's pass protection was abysmal, as the Giants allowed 7 sacks, and they had no answers whatsoever to stopping the frontrunner for the MVP right now, Jalen Hurts, as he finished the game for the Eagles going 21 for 31 with 217 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, a passer rating of 109.2, 77 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. This game was so bad that midway through the third quarter, with the Eagles up 34-14, and the outcome not being in doubt, Fox made the decision across the country to cut away from the game to show a more competitive game, whether that was Cowboys-Texans or Lions-Vikings. Alright, so that game was a dud, but hey, that's the beauty of a doubleheader. You get 2 chances to put your best foot forward instead of 1. You can't win them all. And at least the 425 game should be an interesting one on paper. You have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, leaders of the NFC South and winners of 3 of their last 4, going up against a very good San Francisco 49ers team that entered at 8-4, entered as winners of their last 5 games, entered with the best and hottest defense in all of football, and entered with the last pick in the NFL draft making his first ever start, creating some obvious intrigue at the quarterback position. Surely there's no way that this game can result in a blowout, right? Surely there's no way that this game can be any worse than whatever the heck we just saw at 1 o'clock. However, the second burst was the same as the first. If anything, it might have been even worse, because the 49ers absolutely destroyed the Buccaneers in this one by a final score of 35-7, and it wasn't even that close, as the Niners led at 35-0 with 3 minutes left in the third quarter. Tom Brady looked completely cooked, throwing 2 interceptions and missing a bunch of wide-open receivers, being completely unable to throw the ball down the field with any kind of touch or accuracy. Tampa had no answers to stopping the 49ers on the ground, as San Francisco finished the game with 209 rushing yards on 5.8 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. And they could not stop Brock Purdy under center, as he had a great first start, throwing 2 touchdown passes and posting a passer rating of 134. It also helped that head coach Todd Bowles made one of the dumbest coaching decisions of the entire season in that game, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, much like the first game, the second game was such a blowout that many Fox stations decided to flip to the more competitive Panthers-Seahawks game. This means that both of Fox's games got flipped. Per the NFL broadcasting rules, in the second half, if the score is at least 3 possessions, a network has, at their discretion, the ability to cut away from their current coverage of the blowout game to show a different game. It happens from time to time, but not often, especially this year, when the games across the league have never been closer. And yet, here was Fox, doing this twice in one Sunday. So I had to ask myself the question, was that, in the near 30-year history of the NFL on Fox, the worst doubleheader of all time? Has Fox ever had a Sunday slate that bad, where they got to air 2 games, and both of them were absolute duds? With that, I did some digging. And folks, if you thought that this was the worst doubleheader ever for Fox, it is not recency bias to say that it was the worst. At the very least, it's in the discussion. Here was the methodology that I used. I took a look at every single doubleheader that Fox has had since 1994, when they first got the rights to show NFL games. Then, I looked at the scores of each of their national doubleheader games. To figure out which game got the national doubleheader, there were a variety of resources that I used, from 506 Sports to newspaper articles to announcer pairings and matching up the depth chart of announcers with the games. As an example, I don't need a map or an article to tell me that if this was 1995 and a game had Pat Summerall and John Madden on the call, that it was the national game of the doubleheader and was being shown to the majority of the country. And then, I took a look at all the scores from those games and wanted to see how many of them were decided by 25 or more points. That is not an arbitrary number. 25 points is what it takes for a game to be a 4-possession contest. So I wanted to look at what games were truly not competitive, where you're definitely playing the backups by that point. In other words, I looked at every national doubleheader game in the early and late time slot and just took the ones decided by 25 or more points. And if 2 of them happened on the same day at different time slots, just like Eagles-Giants and 49ers-Buccaneers, then it counted. Now there are some problems with this, I'll admit. Number 1, there is no way of knowing whether or not Fox cut away from some of these games. There is no tracker for this, and while I obviously know that both games from Sunday left coverage early, if something happened in the late 90s, there is no way to figure this out. So this isn't necessarily a list of all the times that Fox cut away from both games of a doubleheader. Rather, this is a list of all the times that it was feasibly possible that they could have done this. And number 2, even though a 25-point margin is big, it doesn't take into account games that felt like blowouts in that range, but wound up being closer than that. As an example, let's say that in a game, the home team is up by 38 points with 3 minutes left. The other team then scores 2 garbage time touchdowns in the final 3 minutes to make it a 24-point game. Technically, that wouldn't count under this criteria, even though that game was just as bad, if not worse, than some of the other games on this list. However, while this system isn't perfect, it's the best we've got. With that being said, in the history of the NFL on Fox, dating all the way back to 1994, including what happened this past Sunday, this has happened 5 times, where both games of the national doubleheader for the network were 4-possession massacres. I don't know if that number surprises you at all in a I thought it'd be way more than that kind of way, or in a I thought it'd be way rarer than that kind of way. But that's what we're dealing with. It's something that, at least with Fox, happens on average once every 6 years or so. And you don't have to go too far back to find the last time that this happened. Because in week 1 of the 2021 season, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Atlanta Falcons met in the national 1 o'clock game, with the Eagles taking that one by a final score of 32-6. At least that game was at least somewhat competitive through 3 quarters. With 5 minutes left, the Eagles led it 22-6. So it was still just a 2-possession game, even though the floodgates opened up by the end of it, with the Eagles winning it by 26 points. And at 4:25, the Green Bay Packers and New Orleans Saints met down in Jacksonville. To the shock of just about everyone, the Saints not only won this game, but they destroyed the Packers in the process, taking it 38-3, with Jameis Winston throwing 5 touchdown passes and Aaron Rodgers playing one of the worst games of his career, finishing with no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 133 yards passing, and a passer rating of 36.8, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. No one saw that blowout coming at all, although at least with this game, seeing as the other 4:25 game on Fox was Giants-Broncos, and the Broncos led by 20 entering the final play of the game, Fox did not switch off of the Saints-Packers game. I should note that for week 1 of that season, both CBS and Fox had a doubleheader, so 2 networks got to have this right instead of just 1. Prior to 2021, you have to go all the way back to October 30th, 2005, when this happened during week 8 of the season. It's happened twice for Fox in the last 2 years, after not happening for over a decade and a half before that. This was the day before Halloween, and Fox definitely felt as though they were tricked and not treated with how their doubleheader turned out. At 1 o'clock, you had an NFC East battle between New York and Washington, 2 teams who entered the game with identical 4-2 records, and 2 teams that were looking good to make the playoffs near the midway point. Instead, what we got was an absolute blowout, where the Giants won 36-0, where Washington had just 125 yards of offense and 7 first downs compared to 386 for the Giants, where Washington turned it over 4 times while committing 10 penalties, and where their quarterbacks, whether it was Mark Brunell or Patrick Ramsey, got sacked 5 times. The game was an absolute blowout, and unfortunately for Fox, their 4:25 game between the Denver Broncos and Philadelphia Eagles wasn't a whole lot better, as Denver won the game 49-21, jumping out to a 28-0 lead in the first half and never looking back. Jake Plummer threw 4 touchdowns and no interceptions for the Broncos, playing the best game of his career. Denver was a force to be reckoned with on the ground, running for 255 yards and over 7 yards per carry. And Philadelphia played really sloppy football, committing 10 penalties, and with Donovan McNabb going 12 for 34 on passes, completing just 35% of them. At least the argument here as to why this wasn't the worst was the fact that with 10 minutes left, it was only a 7-point game. The Broncos led it 28-21 and were faced with 3rd and 11 near midfield. If Jake Plummer doesn't convert there for a touchdown, who knows what happens? At least there was a slimmer of hope that this would be a good finish and a good game, unlike both games in 2022, where the writing was on the wall by the end of the first quarter. Before that, the last time this happened was when Fox got a giant lump of coal in their stocking on December 22nd, 1996, when on the final week of the season, they saved the absolute worst for last. At 1 o'clock, they picked the NFC Central battle between the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings, 2 teams who, while really good, didn't have a whole lot to play for, as they had locked up playoff spots. The good news at least was that this game was tied at the half, with the score tied at 10 apiece, so that alone might be enough to stop it from being the worst doubleheader ever. However, when the Packers scored 28 straight points in the second half to win it 38-10, that was not great for the network, as with Green Bay running all over Minnesota, running for 233 yards on 5.7 yards per carry, the Vikings never stood a chance. And Fox followed that up with their national 4 o'clock game, a battle in the NFC East between Dallas and Washington. Final score-wise, this one was almost identical to the 1 o'clock game, as Washington won this one 37-10. However, they led it 37-3 late in the fourth quarter before a garbage time touchdown by Herschel Walker. I mean, When your national game involves Wade Wilson and Jason Garrett back there at quarterback because you have nothing to play for, seeing as you've clinched the NFC East, it's not going to be pretty. I'll put it that way. And considering that Washington won the yardage battle 483 to 235 and the first down battle 32 to 14, you can't be surprised with how this game turned out. Finally, the very first time that this happened was early on in the network's history broadcasting games, when in Week 5, on October 2nd, 1994, Fox got a taste of what it was like to air a completely underwhelming doubleheader. At 1 o'clock, they got the battle between Dallas and Washington, which the Cowboys won convincingly, taking it 34-0. This one was never close. The Cowboys led it 31-0 at the half, and led it 34-0 midway through the third quarter before nothing happened the rest of the way. Dallas had over 40 minutes of possession. They forced 4 turnovers, they held Washington to 28 rushing yards on 1.5 yards per carry, and they nearly tripled Washington in total yardage, outgaining them 323 to 110. It was that kind of day, where the game was so out of hand that Dallas's final 11 plays were all runs. And at 4 o'clock, you had what should have been a fierce NFC battle between the San Francisco 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles. Instead, the Eagles, who were 9-point underdogs, won the game 40-8, leading it by 22 points at the half, in a blowout still talked about all these years later for just how shocking it was. No one saw this coming. No one saw a game like this where the Eagles would outgain the Niners in total yardage 437 to 189, and would force Steve Young to go 11 for 22 with just 99 yards passing, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 23.6. It truly was a crazy and shocking victory, considering the circumstances and considering how crazy the final score was in relation to the spread. So there you have it. What happened this past Sunday with both games being switchable blowouts and complete duds is rare, but it has definitely happened before for Fox, as you've got incidents from 2021, 2005, 1996, and their first season in 1994. And with that as the sample size, you can legitimately make the argument that this past Sunday was the worst doubleheader in Fox history. At least 3 of the previous ones had a game that was close at the half or through 3 quarters, where it was still up in the air as to who would win, and there was still some suspense. And even though 1994 did not have that, the historically shocking nature of Philly's win over San Francisco is probably enough to catapult that one over Week 14 of this season. So was it the worst national doubleheader in Fox history? You be the judge of that. But between the Eagles-Giants blowout and the 49ers-Buccaneers blowout, in honor of San Francisco's win, this slate of games for Fox was definitely not too purty. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.